Okay, so as usual, it's my privilege to give you some insight into what this rapidly growing team is up to. The roadmap presentation. But before I go into what we're about to do, I thought we should maybe take just a couple of minutes to celebrate the fact that this year is where we celebrate 40 years in April of Dyalog APL. It was released, I think Pete Donnelly, John Scholes, and Geoff were in Washington, D.C. 40 years ago, a bit more than that, and released Dyalog APL. 40 years. And, well, Git has already spilled the beans on Geoff. Geoff, of course, together with John Scholes, the two-man team that implemented Dyalog APL version 1, starting in 1981, released in 1983. And as Git said, we hope to have Geoff back next year in Glasgow. Yeah, we are able to, ahead of time, tell you that the conference, the dates, and where it's going to be. We're going to be back in Glasgow where we were in 2016, right? So Geoff, I think, has more or less promised now he's going to be there and tell us what he learnt in those 40-something years. And although Dyalog APL is a very old system, it's also, I think, we like to think of it as the youngest APL system out there today. And it's been changing its skin through all these decades where Dyalog APL has existed, adapting to new environments and trying to offer APL users the best tool for development in whatever the paradigm was of the day. I put my marketing hat on for 30 seconds making that slide. I hope you agree with some of it. Now, I apologize also, there's lots of slides here with far too much text on. I can't possibly go through all of this, but if you're watching this presentation recorded, you can pause it here. Otherwise, just enjoy how much there is. So here, this is from our existing web page, some highlights of what we did in the first 30 years. I might highlight, I think, namespaces and the Windows GUI as the things that are the reason why so many of you are here, the existing users are here. And the functional programming that defends John Scholes' work is perhaps the most important thing, keeping APL really as a modern and relevant programming language going forward. A couple of my favorites from the last decade. I don't think I'm going to highlight any of those. The point here is really just to show that there's an enormous amount of stuff going on. And maybe some of you are thinking, Git is retiring now, what about Morten? Well, I have a list of things that I've put in for the first half of the 5th decade. And so that's at least my bucket list. And as you know, these things always take much longer than Morten thinks. So it's 9 years until I'll be 70. So there's lots of stuff left to do. We haven't run out of ideas yet. But again, I'm not going to go into those. Some of those will appear on subsequent slides and in talks. And here's some other things we really want to do that are less technical. We want to have universities offering APL courses again. And APL recognized as a tool for modeling. And we're still, our business continues to grow as we pick up market share and as our existing customers grow. But we have some small and completely new applications. But we're still waiting for the first sort of really significant APL application created by a completely new user. And this here full stack development, which is really, I mean, the work that John did to give us Quad WC back in the 90s, which delivered this for Windows users, is something that's sort of just slightly out of reach at the moment. Building complete web applications, including a front end, is a bit tricky, and that's one of the things that is really on my wish list. So how are we going to do that then, now that the giants are no longer with us? This is a very happy event at Dyalog in 2010 when Ken Iverson's Blackboard arrived in Bramley, and we have Roger Huey, John Scholes, and I think that's Geoff's head down below, right? Unboxing the Blackboard. It's not that Blackboard, it's his last Blackboard from his office at IP Sharp Associates. Peter Wooster, I think, if you know him from IP Sharp Associates, told us his wife said it was in the basement and it had to go. and we paid for it to be shipped, and that's where we do important design work at Dyalog, is done on that blackboard, so that there's no nonsense. We can feel Ken watching us when we work on language extensions. So how are we going to do it? Well, you've already seen all the people who stood up. We have a lot of new people and a lot of talent. These people I think you've seen on, I've put on slides probably the last couple of years. It's the last time these people will appear as the new generation. These are now the veterans. But last year we had 3 new people in Portugal. 2 C programmers and Jesus, who's going to be doing 2 talks here on the work he's doing in getting APL back into universities, helping us with that. And then, of course, those guys are also moving up, so they're up on the top shelf, and Gitte has told you about these 5 people who have joined. But this year we also had 2 summer interns who are here. Asher is here already. Camilla had some university work to do. She's arriving a bit later. And, you know, who knows, maybe they'll be working for us someday, or just doing stuff for us out in the academic world. And we are starting to see signs that, you know, we might be able to achieve this, which I think is one of our really important goals in terms of getting that next generation of users. So we have Marcos here today. He's talking tomorrow about using APL as a modeling language for quantum computing. And Jesus, who's doing 2 presentations on the work he's doing on metallurgy. And Asher, who's returned briefly from having gone back to university to tell us about some adventures he's been having teaching his classmates or school colleagues APL after his internship. And of course Aaron is still doing the rounds mostly. Who else do we have? Rodrigo was with you. So, yeah, it's really good to have a guy whose name starts with 2 A's, so that after the 2 keynote speakers at LambdaConf this year, there's Aaron in the middle of the screen. And now we have Arush as well. So we have 2 people with 2 A's at the beginning. And here's one thing I'd like you to consider whether you might be able to help us with. Can you host a younger member of our team for 3 to 5 days? Just looking over your shoulder as you do your daily work. Because one of the things that we can see, although we have a lot of talent coming in, a lot of the old-timers have experience as consultants. I usually say my chief qualification that makes me a usable CTO for Dyalog is the fact that I think of our top 10 customers, I have actually done consulting projects for 8 out of 10 of them. I have spent weeks on site with them, understanding what it is they need from an APL interpreter. And that experience is simply not available to the young people joining our company today. There is no APL consulting market of that type. All the APL people are embedded in development teams in various companies. They're not doing the rounds. So if you could host somebody, all you have to do is buy them lunch and coffee. We'll cover the transportation and so on. And if you're really able to think a little bit outside the box, maybe you could think of a little consulting project you need done in your organization, maybe some kind of platform migration or upgrade or something, where I or one of the other senior Dyalog people would bring an apprentice along and do that work for you. It won't cost you anything. Of course, if you can help with the hotel bill or whatever, so our out-of-pocket expenses is less, that would be great. But this could really help us to build a team which is as strong as the outgoing team. We have the talent, but we need help getting the experience. Okay, so you may remember from last year, here's my roadmap, where I was talking about all the things going on in parallel at Dyalog. The 10 different tracks on the roadmap. This year, there's even more going on. So I found a picture that was. I think there's still good movement through this. Cars coming in at one end and going out at the other end. But you can also see why we needed more admin people to help us organize things. And sort of lead into. You may have noticed that version 19 is late. It was supposed to be out. By the end of the second quarter was the plan. And here's some excuses. We hired new people. Well, first we had to find them and then hire them and train them, and we brought on admin people and they helped us adjust our processes. And we had the summer interns, which was absolutely wonderful. They question everything that you're doing, which is very healthy but also time consuming. And now we have 2 .NET bridges instead of 1. Microsoft is making our lives more interesting. And 2 Mac OS variants to build and sign. And we have ARM64 on 3 new platforms. And this sort of led us to the point where we could have released the product around now with a 3 or 4 month delay, but decided that would be a really bad idea to do with the user meeting. And then Microsoft served us a nice excuse for delaying it another couple of months, because there's a new version of .NET coming out in November, and we thought it would be good to synchronize with that. So the plan is, once we have our hands on the final release of .NET 8, we want to do a little bit more testing, and we'll beta test at that point, and then release maybe in January, probably. So if you're really keen to get hold of the new features of 19, it's already available for, we have many major customers actually using it, for testing it, but the official general availability won't be until January. Right, so here's a bit about what's in it. So there's nothing sort of really earth-shattering in 19. It's a collection of features which all sort of move us in the general direction of being, making more productivity for you in the IDE, but also a lot of work on making APL, Dyalog APL, more suitable for delivering large systems, so running lots of APL interpreters in parallel and so on. Service orientation. So this is a slide, I think, from last year. It's something that just gets more and more important. There's not actually anything in version 19 for this, but I want to remind you again that one of the best ways to deliver value to your organization is if you can encapsulate some of your APL functionality in things that could be called from other parts of your IT infrastructure. And virtually every single new project that I speak to customers about at the moment is using Jarvis or HTTP commands, so our web service framework and the HTTP client. So if you haven't looked at that yet, you should put that on your roadmap for learning about it. And I think we have no less than 6 presentations over the next couple of days, either from Dyalog people or from customers who are starting to use this technology in various ways, service orienting their APL systems. This is very important for keeping APL current and alive. We talked about, I think this slide also somewhat of a repeat from last year, except they're now also M3 Macs. So there's a new version of it's not new anymore, it's several years since this chip came out, but it's something that is appearing in more and more IT systems. So there's the new Macs. There's now a 64-bit Raspberry Pi, which is also based on this architecture. And perhaps most importantly, it's starting to appear as a chip that you can run in the cloud. So Amazon have their own version of this chip. The reason that's interesting is that it's a low-power device, which makes it really appropriate for cloud computing. Ron's going to talk about his work on that on Tuesday. And this Raspberry Pi is really quite a powerful thing. You could run Windows on it. I don't know that this is something I recommend, but it's an interesting idea. Presumably you can then run Dyalog APL in the, what's it called? The Linux for Windows system. But most importantly, I think it's this one here. And this is just a random web page I found on the internet for some company that makes databases, I think, Skiller. And they had done some benchmarking and found that if they run their own test suites and so on cloud instances, then they get 15 to 25% better price performance running on ARM Linux instances compared to Intel. And if you have a lot of load on the cloud, that could be a very significant amount of money that you could save. And from Dyalog APL application perspective, there should be absolutely no difference between an Intel Linux and an ARM Linux. Only your calls to DLLs and so on. Right, so there's a new version of, how many Mac users here? Okay, a few. But some of you are not using the Mac as a Mac, but using it as a place to run virtual machines for Windows. But there's a new version, and Apple keeps, you can see on the right there, Apple keeps changing their hardware platform. They've done it again. So for this one release, there will be two versions of 19. There'll be one for the new chips, and we will produce the last Intel-based Dyalog APL for the Mac. It will be version 19. Version 20 will only be for the new Macs, the MX Macs. And it's only available 64-bit Unicode. And while we're on that subject, I put this slide in to scare those of you who are still using this stuff, because it really is a rapidly dwindling number of users out there now. If we look at significant clients on Classic, it's down to a handful. And I know that from talking to people that at least half of them are actively planning or working on getting away over to Unicode. So if you're still using Classic, it really is time to think about one thing we're considering. So there may be some AIX users in the room. They are probably a bit safer from this than the rest of you, because we may decide that one way to move forward is to offer Classic only on AIX, Jim. 32-bit also, it's getting really hard for us to test 32-bit, because all of the components that you would want to test your APL interpreter together with are getting hard to find. How many people are still on 32-bit? Right, okay. So, I'm planning to move, yes, I think. Some of you anyway. And one thing that we have decided to do now is, at the moment, it's cheaper to run 32-bit than to run 64-bit. Next year, that will change. The price will be the same. Basically, the 32, there will no longer be a discount for running 32-bit, because it's actually harder for us to develop and maintain 32-bit than 64. And Andy may have a couple of things to say about that in his return to the fireside. Right, so .NET, yeah, this is, I don't know, this is maybe a boring slide, but Microsoft has sown enormous confusion with starting out with something called the Microsoft .NET Framework, which Dyalog interfaced to right back in 2000. Yeah, so we've had an interface to the .NET Framework. Then they experimented with all sorts of things, but eventually settled on this thing they called .NET Core, which had version numbers 1, 2, 3. But then recently they decided that they would now, the .NET Core thing would be renamed .NET, and it was the thing that everybody should be using from now on. And therefore it now has version numbers 5, 6, 7, and 8. Whereas if you hear talk of Microsoft .NET 4, that is the .NET Framework. And 4.8 was supposed to be the last version ever, but now apparently there's a 4.8.1. So that thing is dead from Microsoft's perspective, which means you've got about 25 to 30 years or something to get out of it. But start thinking about it. All the focus going forward, and that includes the Dyalog tooling and testing and so on, is going to be more focused on the new .NET. And we now have two, so we started supporting Core in version 18.2, and we're now targeting 8.0, which is the latest long-term support release, which will come out from Microsoft next month. You need to start looking at this. From an APL program's perspective, if you have been using the framework, you'll need to make some small adjustments, mostly to your code. Microsoft has moved some libraries around, and they have moved some of them out into something called NuGet packages, which I'll be talking about later today. So some of the things which you expected just to be there in framework, you now have to install an additional package first. So it's not a huge amount of work to convert your application, but it will take you a few days to sort things out. In most cases, I think no more than that. So the we've had a .NET bridge to the new .NET for a couple of releases. It's now much more mature, and I think, is it fair to say, John, that it is now on par with the framework bridge? There's very few things missing. Yeah. So it's very, very close. The newest thing, which wasn't there in 18.2, is that you can now export APL code as .NET assemblies. Did I say that correctly? Yeah. So that means you can now, with the new .NET, you can take your APL code, turn it into a class, and use it from ASP.NET or C# programs or any other .NET language. You've been able to do that with the framework for decades. Now you can also do it with the new bridge. And bound executables, how many people use bound executables? Oh, there are some. So a bound executable is where you take a workspace and you combine it with the APL interpreter into a single file, and then you can just ship that. So it's very convenient. You've been able to do that under Windows, well, I say always, a very long time. And now you can do it on Linux, right? But Mac?
Mac's difficult because of the signing.
Yeah. So we will, if you need this for Mac, talk to us, but with the Mac there's this additional business of signing the end result, which is a tricky business. It causes us much pain when producing the Mac version. Yeah. In the longer term, there is something, it wasn't up on those first slides, but there is a problem to be solved with encrypting and signing your application code that you distribute, whether it's in the form of bound executables or text files that you want to package up and ship. At the moment, we leave that all to you, but it's possible. Come and talk to us if you think we could help you with providing tools for that. Okay, so here's one of the features that I really like from 19. So this is sort of shows the problems that are popping up as people build larger and more complex systems. So you may be familiar with tget and tput that allow one thread to say, well, here's a result, and pass it to another thread that could be waiting for it. And you've been able to do that for, I think, at least 20 years in Dyalog APL, just with some numbered tokens. But as we now talk about packages and loading other people's modules into your code that they have written without knowledge of what you're doing, you then get a problem that there needs to be agreement about which numeric codes are you going to use for your synchronization. And this has come up at a customer site, and they asked for this. So now you can now allocate a range of token numbers that you can use. So collaborating applications, they don't need to know about each other, but they can say, well, I want to use this range of tokens and not collide with each other. But we're cleverly using floating point numbers for the new tokens, which means they won't collide with any existing code that hasn't been converted to the new system. Does that look like a workspace? So again, this is a problem which has been in Dyalog APL since day one. I think it must have been, but it's being discovered now because people are writing services that run for days and months and years. And there's this tiny, tiny little chance that if you have a runaway recursion or something which causes a workspace full with almost no space left. I mean, normally you get a workspace full by trying to allocate a megabyte array, and you get a workspace full, and there's lots of workspace left. But if you have a recursion, there might just be a few kilobytes left. And then the entire system may grind to a halt. It may not even do the error trapping for workspace full that you have set up. And again, it's been there for ages, but we've now put in protection in the system so that it will squirrel away a little bit of space that it will release for its own purpose. And you can rely on a workspace full trap to actually kick in always. Yeah, this is a weird one for people who haven't been using Dyalog APL for a long time. Most of you know that Dyalog APL regenerates source code from tokens when you edit a function. And that means that any white space that you put in or the exact way you typed your numeric constants is not preserved. Unlike in, I suppose, any other programming language where the text source is the source. And we have now decided from version 19 the default will be to preserve source exactly as typed in the workspace, so alongside the token. You can turn this off, right? So if this means this would consume, gigabytes of space because you have 100,000 functions in your workspace, you can turn it off. But we think this is what all new users will expect. And certainly we have complaints from migrants to Dyalog APL from other APL interpreters that we don't do this. It's obviously the right thing to do, even though Carlo is frowning. Multi-line input is on by default in version 19, so it's been there experimentally for some time. Now it's on by default, so you can type multi-line defens. Does this work? Whoa. Multi-line defens, and here's something I really don't understand the purpose of, but some people like it. You can type a control structure directly into the APL session, and it'll work. HTMLRenderer. How many HTMLRenderer users? Still a small number, but this is something that we can see is slowly growing as people adopt generating HTML or pipelining through HTML from other applications into windows that are managed by the APL interpreter. So we've been slowly adding features to that. I won't go into the detail. Now, what is the HTML renderer? Some of you are thinking. So if you can generate some HTML, as we have done here, hello Dyalog 23, and a picture that's downloaded from the internet with a URL, then you can just create an HTML renderer object. This works the same way under Windows, Linux, and Mac. So you get the same UI on the 3 major platforms. This is useful. If you haven't looked at it, take a look, because it might be something you could inject just into a corner of your application to do something that you're finding difficult to do at the moment. Source code management. Well, this is something we've been talking about for a long time. I have a presentation this afternoon where I'll be looking into the package side of this. What to say? I'll talk more about that this afternoon, but we are bundling prototypes of a project manager and a package manager client in version 19, so you can enable them if you want to play with this. I would very much ask you to play with it if you can, because I think this is critical to attracting new users to APL. They will expect that a language system has that sort of thing. And we're starting to, I think this is the same slide I showed last year. There hasn't been that many new packages added to the package manager. Please take a look and contribute utilities and so on to the package manager to make APL more attractive to the new users who are coming and expect a language to come with utilities and packages that they can just install easily. Again, more about that this afternoon. And the people on this slide, think about whether what it is you're talking about in your talks could be turned into packages. The Kafka interface, the YAML parser, the statistical libraries, and the Vega chart interface.
That time is wrong for the Kafka thing. It's 2 hours earlier than that.
Is it 2 hours earlier than that? So Stefan is at 14:45. Sorry about that. Well spotted. Another feature in 19 that's really aimed at using APL in the large, so you might have dozens or hundreds of APL processes that you need to manage, is the health monitor. And this is, it's still experimental. You have to ask us for the documentation. It's not included with version 19. But it allows you to open a socket to an APL interpreter and ask it for information like, I want the account information, the workspace information, and the thread count. And it will then, you'll be familiar with this is essentially the contents of Quad AI. This is the contents of 2000 IBeam mostly. So it's telling you all these things about how many compactions and things, events there have been. And very importantly, you can see whether there are any suspended threads in the interpreter. So you could be monitoring 100 processes, and if that number suspended ever becomes non-zero, you can immediately ring an alarm bell and say, well, process number 17 has crashed without a trap statement kicking in. You need to take a look at it. Yep, so yeah, we closed a lot of issues in version 19 as well. And very significantly, there had been some defun threading bugs that had been around for some years that eluded even John Scholes' efforts to fix them. And some of the new team members figured out how to fix them. So that's one thing that really warms my heart with respect to feeling confident that we really do have a team that can continue to enhance and maintain the interpreter. Yeah, never mind that slide. Okay. Well, I mean, this is a problem. New employees finding bugs in the interpreter. I don't know how many of the Mantis issues we have that come from there. And of course, new users. You bring in people from other APL interpreters who use the APL interpreter in a different way, and they find bugs that you hadn't found already. Yeah, anyway, it's all fun. Right, so a little bit about what I think might be in version 20. I still have 15 minutes, right? 16. 16, thank you. And counting, thank you. So there's stuff, there's always stuff that wasn't quite finished in the previous version. So there's optimization work that Carter will talk about. There's ideas for the .NET Bridge that John will shed some light on. More HTML renderer, etc. The health monitor needs to become a proper thing. And then there's the sort of the next set of real projects, the array notation, which we've talked about. In fact, I think I have slides on most of these, so I'll just dive straight in. So array notation, we've talked about this. This is now. We've sent out a request for feedback. We have had very little feedback. If you don't give us feedback, we'll just go ahead and do it. So here is some code that you might see in existing applications, and the array notation provides a much cleaner way to write it and making it much more readable. We hope. That's what we think anyway. We've been working on this, mostly Adam and Phil last, for, it's not quite a decade yet, but I think we started in Sicily talking about this. It also includes proposals for writing literal namespaces, a bit JSON-like. And this is something that we think will actually change the way you write APL code, because we can use this to provide multiple arguments and named arguments to functions, because it becomes so easy to write namespaces with values. You could imagine passing that as an argument to a function. So go and have a look, and please give us feedback. We need it. There's an APL model which is used in Link. So in Link, you can actually have source files containing this stuff, and Link will load them and write them back. And then I wrote this slide, I actually started on this slide quite a while ago. I said we hope to start a C implementation. But look, there's a presentation on Thursday by Camilla. She has actually, as part of the most important part of her internship, she has written an implementation of this in C. And she'll be here to talk to us about that. That's going to be very significant. The source code management stuff, yes, this is critical. And it's becoming more and more of a focus for me in particular and members of the APL tools team. We're going to be pushing hard on that. There's sort of a little junta forming with Gil, Kai, Rich, Stefan, and myself. Talk to us if you have ideas about this. One thing that came up while we were talking about that is the idea of being able to make watertight compartments for your APL systems. So if you're working on a bunch of projects and packages using different versions of Dyalog APL and different installed packages and different environment variables, languages like Python allow you to create something called a virtual environment, where you say, well, I want this environment, okay, that's Dyalog 18, these environment variables, and so on. And I think that's something that goes very closely together with the projects and packages, and something we want to be putting into the APL interpreter to make it easier to maintain multiple similar but different environments. We've been taking a bit of a break from optimization work. We did an enormous amount of that in the previous decade, and I think some of our benchmarks say APL got twice as fast in the previous decade as it was before. I'm not sure the benchmarks quite match people's real experience. But we're now returning to that in a very careful and structured manner that Carter's going to tell us about later today. HTML renderer, yeah, the thing that I'd like to say in addition to that is that we have an idea that everybody will be better off, Dyalog and users, if we separate the HTML renderer from the APL interpreter and make it an open source project. So that if people want, quickly need new features for the HTML renderer, or they need a new version of CEF, they can take responsibility for making whatever changes are required to get it to work, make a pull request, and we'll pull it into Dyalog APL. Configuration files, yeah, it's another thing that we've taken a little bit of a break on. How many of you have started using configuration files to configure your APL interpreters? Okay, still a very small number. Maybe you don't have cross-platform environments, but what we see is becoming more and more common for people to develop an application on Mac or Windows and deploy it on Linux. And to do that easily, you need a shared configuration file system, because otherwise you have to do it in the registry on Windows and environment variables in some places. So there's still more work to be done on that. It's been available for a couple of releases. I recommend you take a look at it. But we have some things we still need to do on that. Yeah, it's one of those things that keeps sliding. It's important, but not important enough to get to the top of the list. Yeah, John's going to talk about that. One thing which is worth saying, I think this is true, John, we may put things into the new bridge that we will not backport to the framework bridge.
We may. The things I'm talking about tomorrow will probably go into the
Right. So we may keep the framework bridge up to date for a while, but then, consider it to be deprecated. Yes, enough said. I think that's what you're talking about. Yeah. It is what you're talking about. So, yeah. And of course, we do have a list of things missing from the APL language itself that we're going to work on. Adam did a very good presentation last year. If you haven't seen that, go and watch it, where he makes the case for a small set of things that are really important that are missing. He's doing 2 talks on other things that I guess are even more important than Adam, later today and tomorrow. This is the set that you were arguing for, right? We need a better indexing function than squad. We need a depth operator, and there's one of the important compositions behind which is missing. But there's a really good talk on that you can go and watch. The thing that is really sort of the big item on my bucket list is this, we can see in particular when we work on the .NET bridge, I'm sure the same would be true if we were working with a Java bridge at the moment, that more and more of the APIs that you call there are asynchronous. So you make a call and then you pick up the result later. And this is one of the key things that we really need to work on in the .NET bridge. And John did a talk last year where you can go and see some of his thoughts about it. I have this on the back of an envelope. I keep thinking that maybe we could extend the parallel operator, which is modeled in the isolate workspace, and make it dyadic, which is not quite as nice to write, but would allow us to bring all these things together in a single operator, where you could do an in-process fork using the technology that Stig is going to present. You could use isolates as you do now. You could use a green thread, the ampersand running a thread, and so on, and including a lazy invocation where you say, I want a future, but don't materialize it until you need to know the answer. So there's lots of design work to be done there, but that's something I'm really, really keen for us to do. And of course, the health monitor needs to be finished. And
can you buy that apparatus?
That thing, yeah. At Minnowbrook, Ray Polivka also asked whether that was a thing that Dyalog was going to be selling. And running on. yeah, Dyalog APL is actually running inside that thing, yeah. Yes. So we've shown it to a few people who've been playing with it, and there are already ideas for new things to do with it. So, for example, being able to, through a health monitor, terminate a task if you determine that it's gone mad and stuff like that. There's this mysterious I/O project, which is hidden in version 19. Hopefully you won't see any of the work that mostly John has done in version 19. But we're putting plumbing in that allows you to, in the future, if you're running in a scripted environment in particular, change the redirection under program control, attach RIDE, and decide, where are you now providing standard input or what from RIDE. And that's something that's really critical for the scripting and so on, which is another really important thing that probably most of you are not interested in, but the people who are coming from, people who are running on Macs and coming to us from Linux really expect that this is a way you might write your APL application, right? You create a file, the one they called average.apls, which is just a text file, which starts with this hash bang and the name of the language interpreter that's going to run it, and then just a sequence of expressions, and it's picking up, when it asks for quote quad, that's coming from standard input. So down at the bottom here, we invoke it by, we have a text file, nums text, which contains these numbers, and then we say average, and then redirect input from that, and it runs our program and takes input from that. And that's a very widely used way of working outside of the APL community, but a lot of the new people coming to APL really want to do this. So the I/O work is related to that in particular. And the script engine support it's still a bit of a prototype because we don't have that. Yep. And the quad shell, we need a new, that's very dated, the quad SH, quad CMD, and Peter's going to be talking about that later today, and some ideas for profile. And that's the sketch for version 20. And let's see, there are a couple more slides to come. Oh yes, that one again. We have 5 minutes. Oh, and a few other things that need to be done. Let me see. Yeah, okay. So, I rushed through a lot of it, and I'm not sure. I apologize for that. I suppose I should. But you have the slides. There's a lot of stuff to do. As I said, we have not run out of ideas for things to put into the APL interpreter. More and more of them are directed in, you could say, two main directions. One is really helping the people with established applications run really big systems, on the cloud, hundreds, thousands of APL processes, and manage them. And then the other focus is on making APL attractive to the new generation of users who have different tastes and looking for slightly different things. Though curiously, those things are actually merging. So the really big users who want to do all this continuous integration stuff with source code in text files and so on are actually starting to look for the same things that the new generation is looking for. So in some ways it makes our lives simpler. And I will give John 2 minutes to set up. If you think of a question.
Can I use that list?
Thank you.